In most Western countries, doctor-assisted suicide is illegal. In this country, Dr. Jack Kevorkian is the driving force to change that law. In Canada, it's not a doctor, but a patient, Sue Rodriguez. She was diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, an incurable nerve condition. The body's muscles shut down. The result is usually death by suffocation. She decided she would choose when to die, and perhaps change the law in the process. She allowed Canadian Broadcasting Corporation cameras in to report on that struggle. It's a remarkable document of a determined woman and the people who fought for a piece of her life. This fragile woman could not have known what she was getting into when she began her campaign, with a videotape appealing to the Canadian Parliament to change the law, to make assisted suicide legal.
A year ago, when I was first diagnosed, I was quite agile. Today, I can barely walk. I want to ask you, gentlemen, if I cannot give consent to my own death, whose body is this? Who owns my life?
Sue Rodriguez, a suburban housewife in Victoria near Vancouver, was 38 when she was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease. Doctors told her she had 2 to 5 years to live.
There you go.
Over the next 12 months, she deteriorated rapidly.
Do your hair?
Knowing she would not beat the disease, that she would eventually choke to death, she decided when her condition became intolerable, she would commit suicide. She also faced the cruelest of ironies.
Oh, I lost the use of my hands, and I have a hard time swallowing, so I couldn't envision swallowing 60 to 80 pills and being successful at it, so I knew I needed help.
In the summer of '92, Sue met John Hofsis of the Canadian Right to Die Society.
Hello.
He urged her to take her case to court, to challenge the law that makes assisted suicide a crime.
I am willing to help this woman.
Hofsis also agreed to help her find a doctor to assist in the suicide. And if he failed to find one, he would help to do it himself.
ALS is a horrible disease to live through, but I do have it, and I am going to die. My intentions are to live as long as possible, to enjoy my son while I can.
Somebody get...
Sue Rodriguez lived alone with her one young son. She and her husband had separated just before she was diagnosed. On December 3rd, 1992, she and the Right to Die Society held a press conference to announce their challenge to the law.
Hello?
In so doing, she became a symbol. It became a career and left her exhausted, left her with even less time for her son. Life only got more complicated when the legal battle started. She hired a lawyer, Chris Considine, to make the case in court. They started rehearsing for the trial.
Would you please tell the court what is your understanding of the progression of your disease?
Of further weakness and muscle loss.
Considine's strategy was, if it's legal for an able-bodied person to commit suicide, but illegal for a disabled person to ask for help, then the law is discriminatory and should be struck down.
So your choices without committing suicide are to die of suffocation, aspiration, pneumonia. Why is it that you don't wish to die by those methods?
I think it's a gruesome and unfair way to go. And I just feel that I would like to have control of my destiny and want a better death.
CBC Radio News, British Columbia. 2 pro-life groups will be in a Victoria court today to oppose a right to die.
When the case went to court, it was showtime for everyone with a stake in Sue Rodriguez's life and death. Sven Robinson, a politician. John Hofsis of the Right to Die Society.
Probably hard to do.
The forces against her were powerful.
This has far-reaching implications.
Lawyers for the government and pro-life groups presented 1,500 pages of reasons why assisted suicide is morally reprehensible. 10 days later, the ruling came down against Sue Rodriguez. Her lawyer said they'd appeal. Less than a month later, by early January 1993, Sue Rodriguez all but lost the ability to feed herself. She couldn't handle a spoon or a fork.
It was probably just over a period of a few days, not even a week, where I just couldn't coordinate doing that. And that was quite a transition for me. Oh, I'm exhausted. It takes a long time to go through sort of routine daily activities of getting dressed and bathed and fed, so I've slowed down.
You all right?
Don't let go.
Oh, I'm not.
Ironically, living in this twilight zone, fighting for the right to die, gave Sue Rodriguez a strong reason to live.
I believe I was meant to do it. I feel like it's my job.
For John Hofsis, Sue Rodriguez, with her grit and courage, was perfect casting. She would be his passport to a kind of immortality. He wrote a newspaper column attacking the opposition, accusing it of compounding her misery, then forged her initials. The Vancouver Sun printed it.
I signed SR. Just as a, you know, well, I mean, otherwise it would just be, I mean, it had to be signed by something, it seemed to me, right? I mean, it was being submitted in the Voices column, so I just initialed it.
What?
Sue was furious.
I want to be the one that gives direct quotes
Yes, indeed.
on my behalf
Yes.
for anything written.
But what is coming out is a kind of poignant, almost soap opera story that's repeated over and over, still at the present time. There's no political pressure building to change the law. Everyone is just sort of feeling sorry for you.
That what you're creating, though, is a much bigger job than I ever anticipated to get into.
By now, Sue was struggling with a variety of devices designed to compensate for her loss of muscle control. While she smiled in public, her life at home had become almost unbearable. An attempted reconciliation with her husband had failed.
I'm becoming more and more helpless and needy, and that is a hard thing to watch, but to a certain degree, it's hard for me to go through what I'm going through, and I wouldn't mind a little support. But not everyone's capable of doing that.
There it is.
The British Columbia Court of Appeals heard her case. In March of 1993, Sue Rodriguez and Member of Parliament Sven Robinson waited to hear the court's ruling.
The decision is as follows. It is a 2-1 decision against us. The Chief Justice is dissenting. They just basically were of the opinion that really it is a situation in which Parliament should deal with it.
This is a question of...
At a news conference later that morning, Sue and her lawyer announced they would appeal to the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court of Canada. She also let it be known that she'd found a doctor who would help her die, no matter what the court ruled.
The day I will be comforted knowing that.
But Sue's calm, reflective, even discreet decisions did not fit in with John Hofsis's plans. He told Canadian reporters that her death would not take place in secret. Everything would be public. He'd even suggested that the cameras would tape her suicide.
I think that as of today, her thinking has changed completely, and she would be loath to have a camera recording her death for any reason at this point. I mean, I don't know whether it's a middle-class squeamishness or something, but part of me was saying, let's prove to the world that she indeed has a good death.
Yeah, it takes a bit of practice.
But Sue had since decided her death would be private, and her ashes buried under a fig tree in the garden. She also decided to cut all ties with John Hofstas and his Right to Die Society. To Hofstas, it was as if she'd taken away his reason for living.
I've never had a career that added up to anything. I've never had a life that added up to anything. And this, forming the society, was my chance to almost reinvent myself. It was something, and it was a big something. And if I lose that, I don't just lose a job. Yeah, it's like
I got you. Okay.
By late April 1993, it took all the energy Sue could muster just to make it through a day. Nerves destroyed by ALS weakened the muscles in her arms so much they couldn't hold the joints together anymore.
This piece.
Her shoulder was permanently dislocated.
This is capped up here.
Yeah, you moved it.
Okay.
Life became an endless round of indignities witnessed by strangers. No matter how helpful and kind, strangers nevertheless. Dying this way is definitely not for sissies.
But I am dying, and we knew that from the beginning. I guess what happens is...
She still hoped the Supreme Court would allow her to die her way, legally.
And it's perhaps your way of saying...
I'm Don Gibbon. For the second time in its history, the Supreme Court of Canada is permitting live television coverage while it hears an appeal.
On May 20th, 1993, the Rodriguez case went to the Supreme Court of Canada. She watched from home.
Mrs. Rodriguez wishes to exert control over the last days of her life, her body, so that she may die with dignity as a terminally ill but able-bodied person is able to do.
8 different groups, some for and some against, testified.
Killing or assisting in killing.
Pro-life groups and the Catholic Church argued that assisted suicide is morally wrong.
Foreign to our historic and theological traditions.
The 9 Supreme Court justices heard 7 hours of argument and then announced that a decision would come in 4 months' time. To Sue Rodriguez, 4 months seemed practically a lifetime.
No, just a clear patch. I really feel like I'm ready to go at any time. I'm just feeling broken down and sore. My arms and hands are still atrophying, and hopefully my son will feel the aftermath.
That his mom did something.
Yeah, I hope one day when he's older, he'll be proud.
He will be.
Just before sunrise on the last day of September 1993, a dying woman waits and hopes that 3,000 miles away in Ottawa, 9 high court judges will allow her to pass her own sentence of death.
The decision is the appeal is dismissed, and it's a 5-4 split.
Ironic, isn't it, that just one vote decides your fate one way or the other, one person? You've got 4 of the highest court judges, including the Chief Justice of Canada on your side, and one other vote goes the other way.
At a news conference later that morning, her disappointment impossible to hide, her voice barely audible, Sue Rodriguez thanked her supporters and urged Parliament to act.
I hope that Parliament will act and allow those who are in my situation to benefit in the future.
After her loss in court, Sue Rodriguez suffered for another 4.5 months. She spent most of her time like this, in bed, alone, drifting in and out of sleep. At this point, her speech was almost unintelligible. Swallowing and breathing were a constant problem.
This is not fun.
Strong doses of liquid morphine became a steady part of her diet, and she announced it was time to die. In the end, Sue Rodriguez made up her mind to defy the law. With the help of a doctor whose name she kept secret, she committed suicide on Saturday, February 12, 1994.